Hey, how's it going, folks? So, I'm going to address this claim that Americans, by and large, live their day to day life in fear of being the victim of the next killing spree. Now, I know this is mainly going to be informative for people who don't live in the U.S., who probably never been to the U.S. before in their life, namely foreigners, non U.S. citizens. However, I do think that that small number of people who actually do genuinely live in fear that their kids or themselves are going to be the next victim of the next killing spree probably would do well to pay attention to what I'm saying here, because I think some of the things I'm saying here uh, probably would help out, probably things you need to hear. So, we will start with why I'm using the term killing spree and not mass shooting and not school shooting. It is because this is what they really, and I say this to people who are saying we have a mass shooting epidemic in the US or a school shooting epidemic in the US, want you to really think of. They want you to think of the Sutherland Springs massacre or the massacre in Stockton, California. When they say mass shooting, they want you to think Columbine or Parkland. Whenever they say, "Well, we've had over 600 school shootings this year," this is what they want you to think of. But then when you look at their definition or what they count as a school shooting or a mass shooting, it's really laughable. No, these incidents aren't necessarily good things. However, they're not killing sprees either. A large number of them involve a death toll of zero. Yeah. Um, if you look at some of the things they count as school shootings per se, K through 12 school shooting databases, they call themselves, counted an incident recently where a student just brought a firearm to school. No shots were fired as a school shooting. They claim that, and when pushed back on this one, by the way, they spend a lot of time locking their replies, just like Gun Violence Archive. For some reason, they don't want people to reply to them, but they doubled down, saying they were perfectly justified to count that particular incident as a school shooting. But you go through there, and there's a great deal of these things that the gun control side, who poses as researchers, I use that term loosely with them because they're not really researchers, they're activists posing as academics. But you look at, what they count, and it's that. It's stuff like that. A large portion of it's that. Suicides that took place on school property. Hell, they even cited a drug deal gone bad on a school that had permanently closed down months prior as a school shooting. This is the stuff that they count. One such Aussie today cited a number of activists posing as academics. Yes, and that's exactly what they are. I mean, you go through and read their articles, and it's, if you know, you know. You can catch that language. But one of the things that they cited is Americans being afraid of being gunned down in the next killing spree was the fact that more Americans were carrying these. That was what they cited as a reason that Americans fear being the next victim of a killing spree. Well, let me tell you, as somebody who carries daily, that owes a lot of people with their license to carry, and you do carry, that's not the reason why the average person who carries daily does so. I mean, we carry things like these on our day to day basis, not because we're chomping at the bit to shoot the next bad guy, not because we're afraid that today is the day that we're going to be a victim of a killing spree. And most of us understand, I think, that, yeah, we'll probably end up going to our grave not being anywhere near a killing spree. It's just those events are rare occurrences. However, we look at this just like putting on the seatbelts every time we get into a car and go somewhere. We're not anticipating getting into an accident, and we're not thinking, that is going to definitely happen. Drive the remainder of our lives and not be in an automobile accident. And the reason why you put the seatbelt on is because you just don't know. And that seatbelt increases your odds of survival and not getting hurt. And believe it or not, it actually, if you're driving, increases your odds of maintaining control of that car or that truck or that vehicle you are operating in the event something goes wrong. If you're a passenger in that vehicle, you having your seatbelt on keeps you from becoming a flying hazard. If for some reason something happens in that car, so you also end up making other people in the vehicle safer by you wearing that seatbelt. So there is that. This Aussie also pointed out polls from this source. Well, I don't do well on polls because there's a lot of manipulation that goes on in these things. And this is not a secret either. Yeah, people who do polls for a living know how to extract the answer they want. And when you're sitting there saying a poll saying that 33% of Americans live in fear of being the victim of the next mass shooting, well, there are a few thoughts that come to mind. The first being is that, yeah, this is pretty loaded. Hey, I live here in the U.S. I don't hear a lot of people coming to me with this fear in person. The only people who do this are gun control activists, usually. Um, but the second part of this is, yeah, um, what questions did they ask and what did they count as that fear? There are a number of ways you can word a question to make it seem as though they're giving and they are giving their honest answer, but then you count that honest answer as them living in fear when that's not what they said at all. An example of such question: do you believe that mass shootings happen in the U.S. or that mass shootings in the U.S. are a problem? Well, somebody's answer to this being, well, yes, I think any mass shooting is a problem, or yes, I think when a mass shooting happens, it's a problem. They count that as, hey, this is like something like a pressing issue at that point, and that this person lives in fear that they might be the victim of the next mass shooting. Yeah, there are a number of linguistic tricks pollsters use to get the answers that they want. You know, and if you want another bit of evidence as to why polling is not necessarily a good gauge to find out the truth. Well, look at 2016. I know I'm going to trigger a lot of gun controllers with that. 'Cause a lot of gun controllers tend to be Democrats. They definitely did not tend to like Donald Trump. Prior to the election results, what were all those polls saying? They were all predicting Donald Trump to lose his ass off of him in a landslide, but that didn't happen in 2016, did it? So there you have that. The other thing you have to think about is why would all these gun control groups posing as researchers have to pad their numbers on mass shootings and the school shootings to try to make it look as there's many of them happening a year as possible in the US, if Americans by and large really did have that fear of being a victim, being the next victim of the killing spree. The point is that they're actually trying to get Americans to think like that, but they understand that if they told the truth, well, it might not trick as many people into supporting their agenda as possible. And let's not forget that, hell, even if 90% of Americans lived in fear that they were going to be the victim of the mass shooting or the next mass shooting, even if that was the case, that they were living in fear of this, that's still not a concrete reason for more gun control, is it now? It doesn't necessarily mean that 90% of Americans will be the victim of the next mass killing or the next killing spree, or not even a fraction of a percent of those Americans will be involved in any sort of killing spree. Now, does it? It just means that they have that fear. And that fear might be a very misplaced one. I mean, I'm sure if you did a poll and found out that 50% of Americans believed that they were going to get struck by lightning, you know, sometime in their life, would that mean that that is actually going to happen? Or does that mean that there's a significant risk of you getting struck by lightning in your lifetime in America? No, that doesn't. That would be a giant appeal to emotion at that point, wouldn't it? And by the way, probably an appeal to the popular. I know I didn't get the exact name of that fallacy, but you guys get what I'm talking about. The idea that because it's popular, it's somehow correct. So I'm hoping so far that this is educational, because the fact of the matter is that just because people may think we fear living in mass killings does not mean we need to ban rifles like this. And this is really what it gets down to with this, with all their hype about mass killings. They primarily want this because this is their chance to ban rifles like this. Because if they went off the actual homicide data, well, the overall homicide data shows that there are very few homicides in the U.S. where the method used by the person committing the homicide against the other person was a rifle. we're even close to the top. Um, you're more likely to be stabbed to death or beaten to death than shot to death by one of these in the U.S. Unless, of course, you break into somebody's home in Texas or in one of the various other states where it is not only legal but likely that a person would own a rifle like this. That's what it's about. And again, such a ban on those rifles would not affect our homicide rates at all for a number of reasons, one of which I just stated. This is really not about saving lives. This is about getting an agenda pushed. And this is why these gun control groups do it. If they were really concerned about saving lives, they would listen to the other options and say, okay, you know what? We think gun control would work or be even better, but you know what? Instead of gun control, we'll take one of these various other options that other people have put forward and try those out first. They don't want to do that. Anytime somebody says, you know, well, maybe instead of gun control, we should put better security at schools, that gets brushed aside. There are a massive amount of complaints from the gun controllers about doing that. Someone suggests, hey, maybe if they are a teacher, we're trusting them to teach our kids, or they're a faculty member that we're trusting our kids with. Perhaps if they already have a concealed carry permit or a license to carry of some sort, and one of these, maybe we should let them carry on campus. And, you know, even if it requires them to go through some additional training, maybe they should. I'm going to bring up Sandy Hook, for example. The very first victim, aside from the mass killer's mother, of that mass killing was the principal of the school, who was unarmed but rushed the mass killer anyway. It's not too far fetched to believe that maybe she and the rest of the would be victims, well, the rest of the victims, might not have been victims that day had she been armed with one of these. And instead of trying to rush the mass killer unarmed, had she had one of these, she might have been able to engage the mass killer and still be alive. Or even if she died in that, maybe she stopped the mass killer and the rest of the people there would have survived. And this is just one such example. We have a number of examples of armed citizens actually stopping mass killers. Google Eli Dickens or Elijah Dickens, and that is one such example where an armed citizen who was 22 years old made a shot, what was it, over 40 feet away, fired 10 times, 8 out of 10 of those rounds hit the mass killer and stopped that mass killer. And this right here, by the way, was maybe not the particular, well, it was the particular model of G19. I'm just not sure if it was the same variant or same generation of G19, but it was a G19, I believe, that he used, if my memory serves me correctly. Jack Wilson, the guy that stopped the mass killing, not too far from where I'm at a lot of my time. He dropped mass killer with, well, is a SIG P226 like this. It just was chambered in 357 SIG, and mine's chambered in 9mm. Yeah, and yes, I am using firearms as props because they are the item that's being discussed in this discussion. And I think it's very important to have the subject that's being discussed present if possible. Furthermore, I know that many gun controllers love to sit there and show the firearms being used for bad purposes, but they oftentimes like to hide the fact that people use them for good purposes too, which is, I think, the primary reason as to why gun controllers do not like me using props or anybody else in the firearms community using props or their firearms as props when discussing this. And this is why they go and try to get a number of these firearms out of view of the public if they're being used by decent, honest people. This is why they hate open carriers. The fact of the matter is that the gun controllers want to create the image that the average American lives in fear of being the victim of the next killing spree. They want the people to believe that firearms are evil and have no good purpose and don't belong in the hands of the private citizen. They want to minimize all the times that firearms have been used defensively to save lives while painting them out to be the tool of choice for mass killers. This is why media outlets will sit there and blast mass killers out and killing sprees out with the wall to wall coverage, especially if they used an AR 15, all over the news to make this appear as if it's a common occurrence. To just keep pushing this out over and over and over again, so subconsciously people will think this is a common occurrence, but this is why they also do not give too much coverage to the Elijah Dickens of the world, to the Jack Wilsons of the world, to the people that use firearms to stop these things. So, those of y'all who have listened this far, thank you. I know I'm putting out some longer videos in this, well, here recently, but I want to try to make sure that I discuss it a little bit more, discuss the topic a little bit more, and try to cover a little bit more per each topic because I know that there's this balance between brevity and trying to be in depth a little bit or trying to explain further what I mean or whatnot. But those of you who watch this far, thank you all for watching this far. Thank you for bearing with me. And hey, you guys have the comment section below. For those of you who live there, excuse me, live here in the U.S., hell, let me know. Do you live in fear day to day that today might be your last, that you're going to be a victim of a mass killing or a killing spree? Or do you think that you're going to be a killing spree victim at any point in your life? Or do you realize this is probably most likely not going to happen to you, though you realize that, well, even being struck by lightning is possible. And even though it's unlikely to happen to you, it's still a possibility. And by the way, those of you in other countries, chime in your chime in your comments as well. Do you think we really are living in fear in our day to day life, or maybe has this put some perspective to your opinions and to other things you've heard? And do you also realize that even though it's unlikely that y'all may be killed in a killing spree, it is still possible for you too? All right, y'all take her easy out there and have a great day.